Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the panel on part A of our discussion on societal and economic benefits and impacts of research infrastructures. The title of this specific panel, which launches the whole theme, is Communicating Successes and Raising Awareness Among Decision Makers, Their Influencers, and the Public. I would like to say hello to the people who are here in the room, but also acknowledge that there are some people that are watching us from probably all over the world. And thank you for attending. Thank you guys. As you can see, I have a very lively panel of very interesting people with me. My name is Michael O'Neill. I should probably have started by introducing myself. My name is Michael O'Neill. I'm with the Canada Foundation for Innovation, which some of you may remember was the host of ICRI 2020. Which we had last year in 2021. And with me, I'm joined with a really great panel representing the United Kingdom with Bryony Butland. We have from Canada my colleague Claire Sanson, who some of you are familiar with from her presentations yesterday. I have Daniel Stark, who's with Czech Television. And online from Munich, we have Karl Tischler, who is with Eurofusion. So basically what we're going to do is invite each of the panelists to speak in turn on the topic. And then after that, we will have a plenary discussion inviting people from here in the room, but also from elsewhere around the world who have questions they would like to ask, to submit some questions, and I'll have the panel comment on that. So I guess we'll begin with Bryony. Bryony is the Program Director at UKRI Research, Sustainability and Infrastructure at UKRI, which is, by the way, the largest public funding body in the United Kingdom. She's been previously, for 15 years, a UK civil servant, working closely with ministers and making the case for research and innovation. So obviously this topic really speaks to her expertise. Bryony?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. As you've just heard, I've had a career largely working as a civil servant as well as in funding bodies, particularly now, more recently, looking at investment in research infrastructure and how within UKRI we prioritise our infrastructure investments, how we make those difficult choices. So I'm going to be talking to you really much personal reflections, I guess, from those years of experience of doing this type of activity and focusing particularly on what I've learned and what I've experienced in engaging with more policy audiences, senior decision makers in funding bodies, politicians, that type of audience. And then we'll hear from other colleagues on other sorts of audiences as we go through the rest of the panel. So I thought I would start by sharing some of the challenges I've faced on doing this sort of work over the years. Let's see if I can get the slides to work. No. There we go. So obviously challenges are also opportunities, and certainly in all of the different policy areas I've ever worked on, not just science and other things as a civil servant, many of the sorts of issues you encounter in engaging political and policy audiences are quite similar, but I do think there are some sort of unique characteristics to working on science policy issues or areas where we have maybe a slightly greater challenge than on some other topics, which is what I'm going to draw out a little bit now. And I don't have time to give you lots of examples, so I'm going to talk quite generally, but I will try to add in a couple of examples as I go, and maybe we can pick some of that up later. So you will not be surprised that I would start by saying, well, science is quite complicated. It is a specialist subject. People spend their lives working on it, and it means you create a very specialist understanding and language around what you do that can make it really hard to bring in a wider audience. How can they understand what you have learned over that large time in your career? Every discipline, every area, every research infrastructure is full of acronyms and jargon, and if you're trying to engage a new audience in that can be a real barrier to it. We struggle to even talk sometimes between ourselves and between different disciplines because of these language barriers. I was in the plenary session first thing this morning where we were talking about having common languages there. So when you're trying to talk to a non-scientific audience, that barrier can be even higher. And the in my particular role, I work on research infrastructures across all the different disciplines, so from arts and humanities through to physical sciences, medical sciences, some of the data issues that previous speakers were talking about in this room. And so that breadth is both an opportunity, because we have so many amazing stories to tell, but it can sometimes be a barrier, because how can you really see the wood for the trees, as we would say, or how can you actually bring some focus to the conversation you're having with your stakeholders, because you've just got so much you need to convey. Second, very stating the obvious bullet point, science is uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen. That's the point of science. But when you're working in government, and a big part of my role has been trying to make the case for investment in science, one of the languages you always have to speak is around value for money. And if I can't guarantee to a minister what they're going to get for their money, why would they invest in you as opposed to buy another hospital or invest in schools or invest in the road network? So sometimes science will give you those amazing life-changing discoveries, and sometimes things don't work. And so how you can build that into your engagement plan is really critical. I'm slightly smiling at this third bullet today, given some of the political activity that's happening in the UK, but we are looking on a long-term issue in a very short-termist environment. So people change, political priorities change, but actually what we're doing here in this room is investing in generational capability. So you're trying to build and create the capability not just for the researchers now, but for the next generation too. And so how can you work and continue to engage people over a process like that and ensure that what you're doing has the durability? It's not just here for the current political climate or the current set of decision makers, it's there for the next 20, 30 years. Certainly in my experience in the UK, science is very rarely top of the agenda as science in itself. However, what we do, and we've heard a lot about this in the conference already, for example, how science has contributed to COVID-19, some of the benefits that the infrastructures have brought to our understanding of climate change, they are always top of the agenda. So it's about finding the opportunity to bring research infrastructure activity into the conversation on some of these issues and outcomes that are already being discussed. As a very more particular point to government, and certainly in my experience in the UK, I'm not so sure what it's like for colleagues in other nations, but I tend to find researchers think of government as a single thing. Government is not a single thing. It is a collection of competing interests and departments with often conflicting views and tensions. That's the nature of government. And so one of the things that you have to do is think how to engage with a breadth of different stakeholders within government. Because of that range of different interests, it usually means there's someone out there that will be interested in what you do. But you can't assume that because somebody in government likes what you do or understands what you do, that means government as a whole understands anything about it. So that sort of breadth of different interests needs to be built into any engagement strategy. And finally, we've been talking about this in a number of sessions already, but what does the work that the research infrastructures do actually mean for people's lives? What are the potential tangible benefits? What might people actually see as changing? And can you articulate that in a clear story? Sometimes it's really obvious. And the session this morning was talking about challenge-based infrastructures and how actually that can be a vehicle for helping explain where some of the potential future impacts of the work might come. Other infrastructure might be so blue skies, it's really hard to know what the impact of it might be, and actually that's sort of the point. So how can you convey a story and make that more tangible to people when you are really working on very fundamental issues? So what has helped me over the course of the last 15 years? Forgive me if some of these points might sound a bit sort of obvious. It does feel quite common sense sometimes, but actually this is genuinely what I have found has helped me over my time in trying to advocate for investment in science, investment in infrastructure, and engaging with various decision makers. And the number one point is always know your audience and know your audiences. It's amazing how many researchers will have the same presentation that they use when they're going out and talking to any stakeholder, where actually you need to think about who your stakeholder is, who your audience is, what interests them, where are they coming from, what are the problems that they are experiencing which you might have a means to supporting them with. Particularly when you're talking about senior political decision makers or other senior people in an organization, you can get to know them a bit as individuals. So you might understand a bit about their own personal preferences for consuming information. Are they visual people? Do they like to read a story? Are they interested in the numbers? So actually knowing a little bit about the background of that person can help you make a connection so much better. And also use the influences of those influencers to reach your decision maker. So thinking about that wider network of stakeholders who can help you. I have sat in a number of presentations of various sort of research projects to senior audiences, which will always be assumed that it's some sort of lobbying presentation when it comes from the actual organisation itself. If you can galvanise a wider interest from your community, if you can get a number of credible third parties to be speaking on your behalf, you're very much building up that sort of groundswell of support and that credibility with a decision maker that something is happening here that is genuinely interesting. So that wider network of influences is really critical and really important. Using a range of tools, I mean, this is something I've done on a number of different occasions, particularly when you're talking about very quick decision-making processes, is to have in your back pocket a range of different ways of presenting the information that you know you want to convey. And again, it feels like quite common sense, but I have sat in a range of different presentations where a research team will come in with a very long report and lots of very detailed slides. And actually a minister is usually very time poor. They might have 3 minutes to listen to what you have to say. So it's about having a clear story, usually summarized on a single page. It's about having visuals, it's about having the numbers, it's having a whole range of different types of ways of conveying the message that you want to get across and being able to pull those out and use them in different ways with these different audiences. Certainly within the UK, one of the critical things that we've had to really try and build our capability on over recent years, and I think we're still learning actually, is how to describe that wider impact story. As part of some of the financial decision-making processes in the UK, we have to think about what is the economic benefit of the investments that we make. So that means we have to conduct work around return on investment, which can be very difficult. It requires a lot of assumptions to be made, but that is the language that those processes speak, so you have to try and find a way to do that. You also need to think about some of the ways of capturing the wider benefits of your infrastructure and building that in right from the start, so you're collecting data and being able to show that as part of your monitoring processes pays dividends later on. Being prepared to listen, adapt, and respond to the people that you're talking about. Again, common sense really, but lots of people when they do talk to decision makers and politicians will be there to push a particular project and just want to say what they want to say. Pause and listen to the person you're talking to and think about how you might be able to adapt what you're saying to meet their needs, and think about the language that they are talking at the moment. So often issues will have a particular phraseology around them. Certainly in the UK, you see how this can evolve over time. And actually using that language helps you connect with the politician or the senior decision maker. It doesn't mean you're changing what you're doing, it's about trying to connect with that person. And actually thinking as well how you might be able to make the most of the work that you do for some of the public priorities of the day. We are very conscious that a lot of the work we do is funded by the taxpayer, so we are accountable to them, and we need to think about how best to meet those different goals. One of the ways that we often do this through some of the work I look at on our infrastructure fund within UK Research and Innovation is to highlight connections to some of the wider priorities. So as well as talking about the story and the benefit of the potential scientific knowledge that will be created, or maybe new innovative practice that will result from the research infrastructure, it's about highlighting how this can also bring benefit to the local economy. It can be creating jobs, it can be unlocking investment, it might be addressing a particular challenge. And you're not seeking to change the fundamental mission of what you're doing, it's about capturing that wider story so you can connect with a wider range of people. The next one is more chance and a bit of luck involved, really, which is about getting your timing right. So, and by timing, I mean the timing of the people you're talking to rather than the timing that you would necessarily like it to be. And therein lies the real challenge, because obviously you might want a decision, or you might want to some additional funding, or you might want to be talking about what you're doing at a time that makes sense from the point of view of the science and what you've been doing. But actually, even with the best story in the world and the most engaged minister, if there is no financial decision cycle at the time, it's not necessarily going to lead to any change. So thinking about how you might work over time to create a campaign of engagement that will allow you to connect with the decision makers, put yourself on their radar, ready for when a decision is actually to be taken, and then being ready to be quick and respond when those decisions are actually starting to happen, is how you can best capitalize on that. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. I've had major misses in my time, and then sometimes when you can grab an opportunity because we were ready to respond to it and could show that we could meet the goals of the opportunity at the time. And helping decision makers feel part of the success as well is really key. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this, but a lot of the science we do, because it is very long term, what we're often asking of is to please invest quite a substantial sum of money and then leave me alone for 10 years to do this. That's not always going to be the most popular message to be talking to a politician about, particularly when maybe they might not be in post for all that long. So one of the things I always try to think about is where there are milestones along the way which you can use to help people feel part of the journey that you are also on. And that can be about scientific steps and progress. It can be about the usual groundbreaking photo opportunities. But it can also be things like when you're about to employ a lot of new people. It can be about when you're creating a new partnership. It can be about letting a new contract. Everything can be an interesting milestone to help keep your stakeholders aware of what you're doing, give them something new to think about, remind them that you exist sometimes. That's really important. And make sure that they're familiar with you when you're next coming in with something a little bit more specific that you might want for them. They feel a sense of ownership that way. And then I'm conscious I'm probably run well over time, so the final thing I'd just say is persist. I've spent a lot of my career almost feeling like I'm saying the same thing time and time again to another group of new decision makers. But that's sort of part of the role. And it takes time and it does take effort, but it is really worth it over the longer term, because it is about that persistence and keeping going with raising the awareness of what you do. That's eventually going to connect with a policy-related audience. So, thank you so much for letting me speak to you today. I shall leave it there and pass to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Bryony. So that was a very good start to our panel. I'm going to invite Claire Sanson from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So Claire is the Vice President of Programs and Planning, and I should probably add my boss. And Claire, before joining CFI in 2020, she likes to say she started working and a week later we shut down the office because of lockdown. But before then, she is a professional engineer by training in geological sciences and physics. She's worked in the public and the private sector. Prior to joining CFI, she had a long academic career, which she ended as being Dean of Research at l'École des Technologies Supérieures in Montreal. Claire, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Okay, let's go. So today it's my pleasure to present to you a subject that is very upbeat. It's about communicating successes, and this is from the perspective of a funding agency. So I'm going to introduce you to the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and then I'm going to go through a series of examples of communication activities we did in the last few years, like for building a case for obtaining permanent funding from our federal government, what we did during the pandemic, and what we're doing this year for our 25th anniversary. And I will wrap up with a few takeaway points. So who are we? We are an organization of the Canadian federal government which funds research infrastructure in research hospitals, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations. We do that by doing competitions that are merit-based. And to this day, 25 years later, we have injected almost $10 billion in research infrastructure in Canada. So when we were funded, the federal government was injecting money into the CFI on an ad hoc basis. And this was making life challenging for institutions applying for funding, and it was difficult for us internally to administrate the competitions. So we embarked in a multi-year communication strategy, and our goal was to advocate for regular, permanent funding. So the audience were decision makers, and the key message was that the CFI is an effective mechanism for managing public funds. So we elaborated this message into, sub-messages, if you wish, like we promoted the fact that for every dollar the federal government puts in, we leverage the funds, that our competitions are rigorous, transparent, merit-based, so we really serve the needs of Canada's research community, and we are a small organization with low operating costs. So we evolved our storytelling, and we shifted to put the light on outcomes and impacts. So not only we want to feature the work that the scientist is doing in her lab, but we want also to show how this important work has relevance to Canada's society. So we want to show people benefiting from the research work. So that was at a time when the government wanted to see a stronger link between their investments and the result, like the good that it does. Another way we show our relevance is through a tool called the Research Facilities Navigator. So this is one of the pillars of the CFI mission, is to engage and support innovation in the private sector. So this is our tool to reach out to the private sector. The Research Facilities Navigator is an online directory. So it features a listing of labs that we have funded, research instruments and services, and then this is for the private sector to connect to resources that are out there. So, for example, I'm a research manager in industry and I need access to a mass spectrometer for my research. Then I go on the listing, I see which university have one and are interested in partnership projects, and then it's up to me to then follow up and make the contact. This has had a lot of traction. And to this day, we have more than 800 labs and instruments listed on there. We decided to embrace a more marketing approach. So one of the campaigns that we did was, the slogan was, "Research builds our community." So we featured, again, the researchers. You see here maybe a field ornithologist, maybe a biologist who's collected a sample or something. But we want to show also people from the general public benefiting from the research. So we did all the classic products, you know, stories for the website, social media, posters in public places. You see there a poster in our airport in Ottawa to catch the attention of the, civil servants flying out to their business and so forth. So this came to a happy conclusion. In 2018, we were awarded permanent ongoing funding So at that point, then we say, okay, now it's a time to pause, reflect on what works, and where we want to go next. So what works is private sector. Let's do more of that. That's really important to the government. And let's also feature the next generation of researchers and innovators. So our next campaigns, one was called I Picture My Research in Canada. This is because we have a program to attract talent and to retain talent. So you see here posters of researchers who have decided to come or to stay in Canada for their research, and they're telling you why, and say they're very curious, they're creative, they're ambitious, and we are featuring many of them with their particular story. And again, a variety of communication products, online, posters in the downtown core, and so forth. So you see two more of them. I Picture My Research in Canada. For the private sector, our slogan was, research is my business partner. And then we developed posters where you see business leaders, and in a short paragraph, they explain to you how they reached out to the resources in CFI-funded labs to meet their innovation needs. So let's focus now on the pandemic. So communication activities during the pandemic was all about seizing opportunities. So that was at a time when everything moved online. So all our communication activities moved online via our website. So this was at a time at first when there was a keen desire from the public to know more about COVID. I think at this point we've had it, right? But, 2 years ago, people were hungry for basic information about COVID. Governments were investing heavily into COVID research, and there was a general mobilization of research efforts around COVID. So we could not do the classic thing, which is, send a team of professional videographers. They visit the lab, they interview the students, the researchers, they take brilliant pictures of the instruments. So we said, let's give this in the hands of the researchers themselves. And we say, why don't you guys, if you're interested, do video selfies? So we have a series of video selfies on our website, and they're very candid. They're from the heart. It was like an emergency situation, and you have the friendly researcher who's, I guess, with her cell phone. She's, walking in the lab, showing you what can be done right now, how they're pivoting quickly to meet the needs of this very unique situation. So that has been a good success, because I think it's very, very genuine and it's very heartfelt. Moving on to our 25th anniversary. So I don't know if you know the word in French, pontifier. So, when there's an anniversary, you can have the reflex of, oh my God, like let us feature the good that we've done in the past and blah, blah, blah. And then we thought this was not the way to go. We thought, okay, let's rather look to the next 25 years. Let's look to the future. So our campaign is called A Promising Future Now. And as part of the various activities we've conducted, we did a youth survey. So through a polling agency, we surveyed young people aged 18 to 34, and it was to shed a light on the relationship between Canada's youth and science, and also to find where do they get their informations. So this is at a time when you will agree with me that scientific literacy has never been more important. So my communication team told me, spoiler alert. So I'm not to reveal much about the results of the survey other than telling you there is a really rich and interesting source of information, and to invite you to come to our CFI ICRI booth to know more. Like, all the results are in there. But I cannot resist. Of course, I'm a bit chatty, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So what we found, big surprise, is that the young people are on social media and all the time. That's their primary source of information. And they're pretty savvy. Most of them, you know, they can tell what's information and what's misinformation or disinformation. They find science interesting. Many of them see a future in science, like a future career in science. But at the same time, they also follow influencers who, in turn, I wouldn't say exactly follow strictly the scientific method. So it's a complex environment out there, and it's very interesting to find out how the young people of Canada navigate this complex environment. So a few takeaway points while I'm wrapping up. So our communications activities are very well aligned with our government relation. We focus, we have focused, we continue to focus, and we will focus on the people benefiting from the extraordinary work of our researcher. And if I can give you two suggestions, is not shy away from the big questions of the day and making it very personal. This personal connection is the key for you to get attention from your audience. Be nimble, seize opportunity, be ready to adapt to circumstances. So finally, our communication teams would be happy to connect with you. If you drop a line to this email address, they will follow up and continue the conversation with you. But for me, I will be happy to answer questions and then participate in the lively panel. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Claire. Thank you very much. Dobre den. No, wait, that's. There you go. Got it. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to introduce Daniel, I guess, with the perspective of somebody from the world of media. Daniel is quite a well-known television personality here in the Czech Republic. He's a broadcaster. He's a member of the science department at Czech Television. He's also done, outside of scientific reporting, he's also done some reporting on key important events. And I found out recently that you were actually doing some reporting on the situation in Ukraine, which must have been quite challenging. So I should probably also add that of all the conference biographies that I've read, he's the only one who's mentioned that he has a pet, and it's a cat called Mr. Rozarka.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Rozarka, yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Rozarka is crucial. We thought he was a girl. He was not. You saw two little balls under the tail, and, you know, it gives a hint. As Michael announced, I'm working in media. My perspective is quite different than you heard before, and I do hope that we will have a great combination of the perspectives. I work for Czech TV, which is public broadcaster. Our status is quite similar to the status of BBC. I do not work for a state medium, and I will not work for a state medium. I work for public broadcaster. I'm a member of the science department that was founded, thankfully, in 2016. That's why we had 3.5 years to get ready, to get the experience before the pandemic started. Without this experience, we would be in, I do believe, quite a lot of trouble. Thankfully, my bosses were and are enlightened. That's why we get the opportunity. We cover two main areas concerning our work. First of all, we cover the scientific research. What is new in science in various areas, in various fields? And secondly, we want to give the scientific perspective of what is happening in the world. Because we truly believe that science is all around us. Love will have its chance in Christmas time. But during the whole year, it is science that is all around us. People need to understand that everything they use, that everything they do, is being described or created by science. It's not only It's not only the camera that is right now shooting me. It's not only the phone that you are using, but it's also the chair. It is also the t-shirt that you are wearing that is being created thanks to the science. And we need to make sure that people take science as something normal. My goal is to achieve that everybody will take science as something absolutely normal. That scientific perspective on all the issues we are dealing is normal. That if there is war in Ukraine, you want to hear the scientists. If you want to talk about budget, you want to hear the scientists. If you want to talk about how to do some changes in school, you want to hear the scientists. Because science is nothing special. It's part of our lives, and it's normal. That's my goal, to make sure that science is normal for everyone. We do our bit. We cover over 200 scientific topics every month on the main news channel here in the Czech Republic. You can see the rise that was caused naturally by the pandemic of COVID-19, where we concentrated a lot on what was happening not only here in the Czech Republic, but also worldwide. Michael mentioned the war in Ukraine. Just to give you an example, during the first 6 weeks of the war in Ukraine, we offered over 200 scientific perspectives of war in Ukraine. We invited over 300 guests, 301 to be absolutely precise, scientists who talk about the war in Ukraine. We covered and prepared 6 4-hour-long special broadcasts that were dealing just with science and the war in Ukraine. Perspective of not only strategists, but also, for example, psychologists, experts in religion, experts in law, experts in, for example, sociology. Because there is the science, and we made sure that science is always included in the debate. Our main program is called Hyde Park Civilization. It's something that is, as I have learned, unique in the worldwide scale. We have a primetime show that lasts 55 minutes, and it's just for science. Every Saturday evening at 8 p.m., we are starting 55 minutes just for science on our main news program. I had the honor to interview some of the most distinguished guests in the world, including 31 Nobel Prize laureates. Just one of them received the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm absolutely sure you know which one of them it was. And it was really fun to talk His Holiness Dalai Lama, because he's just one big baby, happy with the world. I do have to say that the interview is quite challenging, not only because of the topic, but because of the language, but it was absolutely great. We have 31. You can see the spot in the right corner. It will be filled in a moment's time because we prepared 2 more interviews with Nobel Prize laureates, but did not have time to broadcast it. We do not talk only to Nobel Prize laureates. We talk to people who we believe should be heard in the world. I had the honor to talk to one of 4 people living on this planet who walked the moon. Charlie Duke, as well as Harrison Schmitt, the only scientist who was ever on the surface of the moon. Yes, I was in isolation because of COVID-19, and yes, I was not wearing my long pants because my colleagues forget to send it. Where is the cat? Honestly, to be absolutely honest, I was doing a lot of live broadcasting during the pandemic when the cat was sitting behind me, and also one when he was sitting on my lap, and the hair was coming into my mouth and nose. So I needed to scratch, but you can't, just say, okay, there is a cat. By the way, people knew because he was eating my microphone during the live broadcast. But I wanted to scratch my nose, so I was thinking how to do that. So I was like saying, okay, we are talking about coronaviruses. There are many kinds, there are several variants of several types of coronaviruses. Some of them are causing something you know as runny nose, Everybody knows it during the winter. You can find it online. Everything is online on our website. I had the opportunity to do the single and the only one non-planetary interview in the history of TV in the Czech Republic. This is the interview with Andrew Feustel, who was flying 400 kilometers up there at the speed of 27,000 kilometers per hour. He was on the International Space Station while we were talking. I had the honor to talk to some of the most influential people around the world and some of the bravest people around the world. This is Natalia Gorbanevska, Russian dissident, who stand up against the occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968, despite she knew that she would be tortured, and she was tortured by the communist regime. We do not talk only about life sciences, because it's not only physics, biology, and chemistry that is creating the world of science and the world we are living in. We want to help the humanities, as well as the oral history. This is one of the Holocaust survivors, who was guest of Hyde Park Civilization. And I'm really happy to say that a lot of what we broadcasted is used at schools, teachers use it, they can teach better. And that's what I'm truly happy about. You can find all the interviews that were done, that we performed in English, on our website, hydeparkcivilization.com. It's available online for everybody in the world. If you have any issues, just let me know. I will figure it out. You can check everything you need. Naturally, some of the interviews are in Czech, but that's a separate website. I'd like to, based on this experience, share with you. Sorry, you want to take a picture? I will go back. Take it. You can take selfie even if you want. It's no trouble. Based on this experience, I would like to share with you some of my pieces of advice how to communicate. If you want to communicate your research infrastructure, first thing to do is to forget your research infrastructure. I'm sorry to say it, but nobody cares. What people do care are the projects and the people you have. Forget the infrastructure. If you are not working on ISS or in CERN, nobody cares. But what do they care is what you are doing. Find the stories behind. Find the projects that you want to talk to. Find the people that you can put into media and let them tell what it is all about. How to do it? Prepare your presentation. Write down the key messages you want to share with the general public. Forget the buzzwords that you are preparing for the policymakers. Nobody cares. Because our stakeholders is general public. And as Brian said magnificently, government is not a single audience. But general public is neither. Truly not. So my piece of advice is, prepare a presentation about your work, about the projects, about the people, and go to high school. Talk to high school students. And if you finish the presentation and the students are engaged, are asking questions, and at least one of them want to join your team, you did a good job. If not, remake your presentation. You did it wrong. Find new projects, find new simplifications, find new comparisons. When you achieve that, go to elementary school. At elementary school, you don't want to hire people. Make it clear, please. You don't want to hire people over there, but you want to see an engaged audience. If you have that, you have found the line for starting your communication to the general public. If you start with something more difficult than on the elementary level school, you will have problems to communicate it. According to the psychologist, that's what I learned during the era of pandemic, when we need to prepare the communication for the whole nation here in the Czech Republic. Adults who are under stress need to be told the information as you would tell them to 12-year-old kids. And people are under stress because of what's happening in the world. When you are getting ready for the interview or you are preparing a scientist, make sure that you are truly preparing. Prepare 3 key messages. One of them is, how is your work useful? Everybody wants to know, how is this work useful? Even fundamental research needs to have the potential to be useful, such as femtosecond lasers and Professor Muru, for example, the Nobel Prize laureate. You need to think about something that it could lead to something useful. Use simplifications. Use comparisons. Comparisons are amazing. That's absolutely the greatest way how to talk about science. I'd love to give you, for example, someone who's working in research infrastructure. It's called Biocev. It's near Prague. It's a large research infrastructure. It is Kateřina Hortová, who is dealing with fertility issues, especially in men. And she does not talk about sperm or egg. She talks about lock and key. She does not talk about membranes, about proteins. She uses this comparison to everybody can understand. And she's absolutely amazing. Brian said that absolutely precisely. Audience is key. Understanding your audience. If you do not know to whom you are talking to, you are probably talking wrong. I need to know to whom I'm talking to. I have very different presentations for elementary school, for high school, or for university level. You need to adjust. So always when you go for interview, you need to know to whom you are talking to. Always. And make sure that you know what you want to get from the interview. You need to know what is the result that you are aiming for. Do you want to change a policy? Do you want to inform people? Do you want to engage people? Are you looking for people? What do you want to achieve? If you do not have your goal, you will probably not succeed. And please, if you are working in PR, make sure that the scientist receives his or her feedback after the interview or after something that was recorded. And from my experience, if there is a chance, encourage his or her grandmother to give the feedback. Nothing is as powerful as feedback from grandmother. Nothing, nothing. Grammys are the best, absolutely the best. If you are working in PR, here are some frequent mistakes I come across to. First of all, the PR guy that is calling me does not understand the topic at all. Usually they try to make it like it's something funny. No, it's not. It's not. It usually happens when you hire PR agencies. If you have the chance, raise somebody from your scientists. Raise somebody who will do the communication for your infrastructure. It's much better than the agency that is communicating lasers in the morning and toothpaste in the afternoon. Secondly, inform in time. Brownie talked about the timing. It's not only about the timing concerning what mood is the one you are talking to. It's also giving chance to media to cover it. Just a couple of months ago, I learned about amazing research, amazing field research that was happening here in the Czech Republic. It was happening till Sunday. They called me on Monday. Sorry, I can't use that. It would be absolutely perfect. Make sure that the guest you are offering to the media is ready. So many times I have heard, we have a great research, the results are amazing, Mr. Novak is the one to talk to. I called to Mr. Novak and said, oh, I will be really happy to talk about it. I just have vacation for 2 more weeks. And the last thing, that is the most important one, from my experience, a lot of institutions do not know what is happening in the institution, especially in universities. Forget that the dean will have any idea what's happening in various teams. No, that's simply not true. Please hire PhD students and let them go from team to team to ask Martin, to ask Andrew, to ask Angela, what are you working on? When the outcome will be ready? To what we can prepare to communicate to public. It's so cheap. It's so cheap. Please do it. Just create a calendar that you can prepare for the media communication. Especially the astronomers are having a great time in communication. Maybe, I do hope you saw the picture that was published by James Webb Telescope yesterday with the pillars of creation. It was stunning. You just watch it, you love it, and you are all for the science. But what about this case study? Czech scientists made cover on Science. That's huge. But they made science with something that is called diffraction of electrons. That's some of the worst topics you can have for science communication, especially on TV. You cannot see anything, you cannot show anything, it's fundamental research. Sorry. But we found a way. We talked for a couple days with Dr. Palatinus, and we prepared a special setting with a big board, with laser and a piece of curtain to explain the principle to the general public. We prepared a reportage for the main news segment. We prepared a special reportage that went a little bit more deep, that was talking about the structure and the importance of structure for all the creations that we are having. We prepared a special article, covered the social media. Nearly 1.5 million people learned about electron diffraction. And it was just because they wanted to communicate. And I know the communication is hard, but you need to choose the right equation. Do it right for all the time, or don't do it at all. I know it's a long-term job, but you need to do it in a long time. If you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer here or even after the panel. You can naturally send me some topics that we should cover. Well, let's go for it. I will be very happy. The first email that you can see there is not just mine, but also my colleagues in the department. And as Michael announced, one slide could not be missing, this presentation, the crucial one, which has nothing to do with the presentation at all, but he's just cool. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I will admit I had no idea that slide was there. So it's really kind of unusual when you meet a fellow Canadian, but you meet him in Brno through a virtual contact communication to Carl Tischler, who is in Munich. Carl? Carl is coming, the technician tells me. So while we're waiting for Carl, there is Carl. Carl is as I said, originally from Canada, but is now in Munich. He is the editor for Eurofusion of Fusion in Europe magazine. And then he became the head of communications at Eurofusion just recently in October 2020. His background is in marketing and business, and he's going to be talking about, how you can deliver highest value outcomes to your stakeholders. Go ahead, Carl. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, Bruno. I hope everybody there is having a great conference, and I want to say how honored I am to have this opportunity to speak to you as part of this panel. Thank you, Michael, for organizing, and thanks to my fellow panelists for their great presentations so far. So let's start by talking about perhaps what's the biggest challenge of all, raising public awareness. So how do you target everyone? Well, really, it's no problem, right? Because all you need is big news and someone like Daniel to share it. Except for the fact that big news is rather rare. It also requires quite a bit of infrastructure to be able to deliver and deliver well. And the best thing is that there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll succeed. So let's take a closer look to better understand this challenge. At JET, the Joint European Torus, which is the most important fusion research machine currently in operation and also Eurofusion's primary machine, the last time we really made news was in 1997, when it first set its fusion energy record. We started planning for the new experiments using the record-breaking fusion fuel mix. That started back in 2009. This involved swapping out the interior wall of the vacuum chamber of JET, replacing carbon with metal. And this might not sound like much, but we then had to essentially relearn how plasmas behave and how to control them in this new environment. Now, we also faced challenges that weren't scientific, but communication-based. For instance, the last time that we put out a press release was in 2014, and we also had no media contact list. We also weren't just preparing ourselves, but our 30 members from 28 different countries who communicate in around 24 different languages. So all in all, we spent over 2 years preparing for this event, releasing press releases, learning how to do that better, learning how to talk with the media, building our media list, preparing spokespeople for each member, training researchers, giving them media training, planning and creating visual assets. The list was extensive. After delayed starts and a disappointing initial performance of the JET DT2 campaign, as we call it, finally on December 21st last year, it happened. Our researchers achieved a new fusion energy record, and it nearly doubled the previous one from 1997. Together with our member UKAEA, we announced our results to the media on February 9th of this year. And what happened next was that we were immediately overwhelmed. Media interest eclipsed even our most optimistic scenario. We weren't even close. Our website and press kit went down. Our spokespeople were giving interviews day and night at 2:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, 4 in the morning. They didn't get a break. We made the evening news around the world. And since then, we've identified over 5,200 different news articles that were about this event. And it's very encouraging to see that 50% of those news articles were in member countries. We learned a lot. And one thing that comes to mind is about messaging. And this goes maybe to what Daniel was talking about earlier. So while we wanted to speak about how efficiently fusion produces energy, that we use mere micrograms compared to the kilograms of fossil fuels that you'd need to use to produce the same amount of energy, the media wanted to relate very simply how much energy we'd created, which was 59 kettles of water boiling. This wasn't very flattering. Ultimately, though, all our members have seen an immense increase in interest in fusion energy research in their country, and growth of public support has grown even in anti-nuclear countries like Italy. But the key thing to remember is just how lucky we were that no other big news came out that day. 2 weeks later, Russia invaded Ukraine. So the other big question that I'll look at today is how to communicate with policymakers. What we started to do is to tell them what we're doing. So what we started to do was talk about our accomplishments and make it very clear what we'd actually accomplished, the progress we'd made, and what we've actually achieved in the past years. We also clearly started to communicate what's ahead, both short-term and long-term, in terms of what we are collectively and collaboratively working to achieve. And what worked best of all, after all these presentations and talks, was to actually invite them to come and visit our facilities, and to go and visit ITER, the biggest fusion energy experiment currently being built in the south of France. So after all of these presentations and visits, we held an event called Horizon Eurofusion. That was in July this year. We brought together both EU and national politicians and policymakers, as well as industry, startups, and our consortium members. And we talked about our accomplishments and what's ahead, as well as our approach of integration and collaboration. We featured speakers also from industry, from startups, fusion spin-offs from fusion technologies, speakers that were from our members, our smallest as well as our biggest, and also speakers from the European Commission. And honestly, it was a great opportunity for everybody to speak and listen. Ultimately, what worked was to bring everybody together. As Claire pointed out, the personal connection is really what's important. So thanks, that's what I had to present today. I hope this was helpful and gave you some insights into what we're doing here at Eurofusion and how we look at communications and are trying to solve the big challenges that we're all facing. Feel free to contact me anytime. Here's my email, carl.tischler@eurofusion.org, and you can check out our website at www.euro-fusion.org. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you very much. So while we prepare for audience questions, and I invite people who are watching our session from the internet or on your screen, and people in the room, if you have any questions, welcome to hear them. As you consider your question and prepare it in your mind, I have a question for the panel. You've now had a chance to hear all of the presentations. Do you have a comment that you would like to share based on the shared learning we've had today? Who would like to begin?
Is that on? Yes, okay. I think the thing that's really struck me is actually quite a lot of similarity in terms of the points that people have been making. Ultimately, it comes down to how to connect to individuals as people, actually. And certainly in the work that I've done, ministers are people too. They're individuals, that they have personal ways of connecting with information. That matters in the same way as the stories Daniel was talking about in terms of connecting with different audiences. So I certainly think I've taken away that, plus the need to maybe go and spend some more time with school children in a classroom. I think that would be fun.
Thank you. Claire?
Maybe my learning point is that simple is good. Keep the message simple, punchy. Yeah, that's my learning.
Thank you. Carl, you were last, but perhaps so we don't forget you.
Sure, I like the message of connection and also the simplicity and being provocative.
Great, thank you. And Daniel?
First of all, I would like to apologize on the Kettle Media. I'm sorry, Carol. I truly am. I hope it will never happen again. I do.
It worked great at relating fusion energy in our record to regular people, so it was fantastic in the end.
Yeah, in the end, and that's the way you can use it. You can use it in a great way. I was very happy that Carol said that they do not publish press releases. That's absolutely stunning. I do not read press releases very much. It's truly pointless. It takes a lot of time to create it, because especially you are waiting for the final format to be prepared. You are waiting for the quote of the president of the university or the president of the institution. If you are not the president of the institution, that's different. So it takes a lot of time. And the only thing we always ask the scientists to tell us is what is happening, when is it happening, who we can contact to ask for details, what we can see, because we are audiovisual media, we need to tape something, and why is it relevant? Just these five questions. And I do need nothing more, just these five answers.
I like what you just said is, what can we see? I think visuals are so important. Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah. 75% of, or something like that, of information we perceive is thanks to sight. So it's absolutely crucial to show something, even if you are doing a piece about electron diffraction or something like that. You need to find a way. Yeah.
If I can just piggyback on that a little bit, I mean, Carl's site visits for the politicians from all over Europe, I mean, it was like show and tell. It was an opportunity for people to see in concrete terms exactly what they had been paying for all those years. Would that be correct, Carl?
Absolutely. It's I'm trying to come up with a phrase, but it's turning fusion energy into something that's energizing about fusion. And when people go and visit any of our facilities, it's amazing to see what their reaction is and what their spirit is when they walk out. They're filled with hope and excitement.
Go ahead, please.
Can I just comment on that? But the other thing I always think is really important about visits is who they get to meet when they're there. So actually meeting the researchers themselves and meeting key partners like businesses you have worked with, having them along the visit as well, so that you can actually get that sort of wider sense of impact. And then capitalizing on a visit like that, everyone comes away with a huge buzz when you've been to a visit. It can die off really quickly. So you have to think about how you're going to keep that momentum going in the weeks to come in terms of what are you going to do to follow up and doing it in a timely way so that someone hasn't forgotten about the amazing experience that they had after that.
So basically sustaining the experience that people have just had. I have a question from the audience from away. The question they've asked, and this is for our three members from institutions, but I'll find a way of having you comment as well, Daniel. What budget do you allocate to communications activities per year? Would you happen to be able to ballpark that? Perhaps you, Carl, as head of communications?
You mean out of our total budget?
They don't specify, so take it any way you want.
It's less than 0.1% of our total budget goes to communications.
At UKRI or CFI, Claire?
No clue.
Neither do I, actually. But it is going to be a similar low sort of percentage. But I think a lot of the things I've talked about is not what I would call communications. It's more sort of engagement activities that are not done by the press team. It's done by everybody throughout the whole organisation. It's inherently part of your job. So it's hard to quite put a figure on it. There are particular public engagement budgets, but again, they tend to be really quite small and the tip of the iceberg of actually what people do in practice.
That's quite interesting. From the media perspective, Daniel, how much resources would you like to have the organizations you're reporting on invest in communications and all of the things that you were talking about?
Honestly, I don't care at all, because the only thing I care about is the outcome. They can do it very cheaply and greatly, but they can do it badly and very costly. I would love to have somebody from NASA to tell us what the marketing budget is for NASA. Because I don't think it's something like 0.1% concerning the project. I do believe that the percentage of each project for marketing and communication and engagement of public is much higher, and you can see the impact. You can see how good it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So that was our first question, by the way, from Giada. And our next question from Martina asks, and it's a little bit of a long question, I will read it. For all speakers, looking at different sciences, I see a lot of messages are transferred to people by pictures, images, creating images in their heads, even when they do not understand what it is we do, which I gather is the scientists and the research infrastructure. In the natural sciences, there is always an interesting picture. Astronomy has stars, big infrastructures have facilities, and people get a picture of what it might be possible. In the social sciences, and I can relate to this as a social scientist, we are mostly online, digital, in the virtual realm, and we lack those pictures and images that simplify it for people to still understand why we are important. That's the question. How would you advise to approach this problem and create those images when it comes to social sciences? Because we're talking about surveys, data archives, and things of that nature. And there you go, that's the question.
First of all, forget about the image and concentrate on what you have. And in social sciences, you have the stories. You have the stories. Concentrate on the stories. If you need something graphic, you always use the numbers. You can always use the numbers. You can always use the charts. But first of all, you have the stories. One piece of experience from my personal experience, it was about a researcher that approached me and said, we have a great new book about Jan Žižka. That's a famous figure in the Czech history. I was saying, okay, that's really cool. We can cover it somehow. Why should I read the book? What's new? We have the book. Yes, I understand you have the book, but why should we cover the book? What's new in the book? Why should I buy it? You know, we have the book. That's the end of the research. No, it was back and forth. I was just asking, why is it relevant to the general public? It may be a nice present for Christmas. No question there. But I need to hear a story, something behind. He could tell me that they found something new, something about Jan Žižka I have never heard about. For example, about parents of Jan Žižka. I have no idea. He's a famous guy with just one eye. What about the journey he suffered from coming from Tábor in South Bohemia region, the greatest region in the Czech Republic, I was born there, in South Bohemia region, to Prague, which took 2 days in his time. You know, only the story of him coming from Tábor to Prague, it's cool, because people are mad when it takes 2 hours nowadays. It took 2 days back in his time. That's the story you can use. Please find the stories, and you can share it with the general public.
Oh, I think you answered very well, and then I would be more abrupt, and I would say, really, you cannot find an image? Come on, work a bit harder.
I'm not sure there's much I can add to that, other than that again, it's being opportunistic to use the events that are happening around you to describe the stories of the benefits and what you've done with the data. So I've worked with examples of some of, in the UK we have a lot of long-term data studies or cohort studies where actually just what they are in of themselves is quite interesting in terms of the numbers of people involved in them, and just describing that could be quite interesting. But actually the data is used to make policy decisions. Not many people know that. And you can create a story around what you've done with the data as opposed to trying to create a visual of, I've seen some people do some interesting things with ones and zeros. It doesn't really work. It's more about the stories for sure.
Yeah. And Carl, any insights from your end?
Yeah, I'm going to say that images do matter. I think you have to have the story to go with the image, right, or the photo. When I take the bus in Switzerland, when I'm there, I was working 10% of my time there. And you watch what people are doing, they're all on their phones and they're all scrolling and they're going through picture after picture after picture, and the text, they don't even stop to look at. The pictures are going by so fast. You have a fraction of a second to make an impact. And if you've got a spectacular photo, you can make somebody stop and take a look, and maybe they look at that text, and if you've got a good story, you've hooked them, right? So I do think that an image is really important. But I would also second what Claire says. You just need to look at what you're doing and really capture. You probably have the photos you need, right? So just work with what you have.
Thank you very much, Carl. Audience question? Yes, please. There's a lot of them. How am I going to do this? Okay, hold on. I'm going to turn myself into TV host here. Oh, you have, perfect.
Hello. Thank you for excellent talks today. When we talk about visuals, there was a picture of Nobel Prize winners, and almost all were men. 25% of technology experts in Europe and the US, only 25% are women. Technology is the core of research infrastructures. We have a gender disbalance in developments of technologies as well as among the Nobel Prize winners. How can the communication that you are doing help us change this disbalance and get this career path more attractive to women, pupils, and students? Because we do lose also the students, even if we do have them in undergraduates. They leave and don't go into technology development and research infrastructures. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really interesting and actually very timely question. Who would like to begin? Bryony?
Excellent question, and something we think a lot about within UKRI, where there's been a lot of work on how to sort of broaden the diversity of the research community. It's a real concern. I'm not the expert in all of this, but there are people out there who know how to do this much better than me. But one thing I would flag that we have tried recently is it's coming back to those stories again, and it's talking about the stories of people who are researchers from a whole range of different diverse backgrounds, and actually trying to share their stories with a wider audience. So we have this thing called the 100 Job Campaign at the moment, and talking about different types of people in research, technical roles, more traditional academic roles, support activities for the wider research endeavour, and trying to find people from all sorts of backgrounds, tell their stories and how they've sort of decided to make those choices in their lives. And we're sort of hoping that that's going to shift perceptions a bit, I suppose, in terms of what it means to be a researcher and how it is actually something that's open to everybody.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you. I echo what Bryony has said. We're making a conscious effort in featuring diverse people engaged in research, not only women in non-traditional fields, but also, for instance, people from other underrepresented groups. In Canada, it's very important at the moment that we are showing reconciliation with Indigenous people, for instance. So we use a bit the same overall strategy. We feature people from diverse backgrounds, with the hope that, you know, younger people will recognize themselves, and it, you know, it's the old like role model approach. But certainly we're doing that in a conscious way. We feel it's important.
Thank you. In fact, one of the images in Claire's presentation featured a ICRI researcher, so perhaps we can just refer to that. Daniel?
We hope to add one more Nobel Prize laureate on the slide. We have approached Professor Bertozzi, this year's Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry. Her wife is from the Czech Republic, by the way, so we hope that this tie will help us to secure the interview. Putting it bluntly, yeah, we do hope to secure her. We always choose the experts that we invite, for example, to Hyde Park Civilization, just based on their skills and their experience. We never consider if they are from Prague, Brno, US, Japan, or the gender, anything. We just consider the experience and relevance for the field that we are talking about. In general, I do believe that it's all about the people that you can follow, that you have somebody that can be your hero, your heroine, in the upcoming months, years, and such. I do believe that that's the way, that you can see those who can manage that. And Professor Bertozzi, I don't know if you follow her on Twitter, for instance. She posted a lot of stuff concerning the gender inequality. Sorry, I'm not with the pronunciation, I'm not really sure, my apologies. And she also talked about what's the situation in her lab. For example, in our department, in science department, it is run by women. My bosses are all women. And it's not because they are women, it's because they are better than men. I was offered to be the head of the department, and I politely declined. And I asked my boss to be my boss, because I knew she would do the job better than I would. And she does. She does it better than I would do. So I do think that this is the way, to be honest with yourself.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Carl, any insights?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, our member UKAEA was one of, or participated in the COP event in Glasgow. And for that event, that was the first time that fusion was featured at that event. They had to present people from the global north, global south, global east, global west, and it had to be gender balanced. And we applied that learning and experience to our campaign that we had on February 9th, announcing our results. We were unable to get any political speakers who were female, unfortunately. But what we did then is we featured 3 male speakers and 3 female speakers. And the female speakers then were all researchers. And the interesting thing that we saw with that was that the media wanted to speak to those researchers. They didn't want to speak to the men with white hair that had opened the conversation. So huge interest. They were by far the most popular and most featured. And I think there's a big takeaway that we've adopted since then, and that's to show gender parity, even if your organization suffers from a lack of gender parity, to show it, because it does make a difference. It does make a difference what people see.
If I may, Michael, actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but I would like to thank the organizer of this conference. So far, I have attended a few panels, and I have seen that the panelists and the people speaking to the audience are quite diverse, and I think it's intentional, and I think they've done a brilliant job. So I would like them to know what I think.
Thank you. Clearly endorsed by the audience. We had 2 other questions. We'll go over here, and then we'll go over here, and we'll end with one question from online. If I could just ask for the questions and perhaps the responses to be brief. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. You taught us a lot about how to communicate our research to people outside our research institution. But what about communicating it inside the institution? Sometimes the stories never leave the facility in the first place because the people who talk to the public don't know what we're doing.
I'm smiling because I can recognise that situation slightly. So you're right. I think any sort of engagement or communication campaign has an internal as well as an external strand, and often people forget that internal strand. To talk to your colleagues and help make the connections within your own organisation can lead to a huge amount of benefit as well. And it's the sort of thing that tends to get a bit forgotten. So, stating the obvious, but my advice would always be make sure you think about internal communications as well. And again, targeting particular individuals who can help with making those connections, making sure your senior leaders know what some of those stories are, because you never know when they might have an opportunity to replay those on your behalf. That would, I could go on, but I think we need to keep it short.
Go ahead. Nope. Nothing? Carl, internal communications?
Yeah, I think it's really important for the reasons that Briony mentioned. It's also, to the points made earlier, it's about stories. And you can't have messages. Typically, internal communications are, the message from the CEO and the CFO and the CMO and whoever else. Get rid of all that, feature people, and share the stories of people. If you want to drive engagement, if you want to reach people and have them talking about what you're communicating, if you want to get them engaged and interested to really understand the full scope of what you collectively are working towards, it's to collect and share stories about people doing the work.
Thank you very much, Carl. I'll take the question over here, and then we'll end with one online question, and we have just about enough time. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I try to be brief. My name is Manfred. I come from a completely different side. I try to help people to convey the story what they want to do in the future and get funding for that from the European Commission. So I'm a national contact point for the Horizon Europe program. And the thing is with science and research, when I try to help them, there is an inherent uncertainty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be research. And scientists are very eager to convey this uncertainty to anybody they talk to. So we might know about this. We think it could be in that way. We saw what happened with that, with the tinfoil hats, with COVID pandemic and 5G and so on. And the funding agencies and the evaluators, they all want to see certainty. So do you have any tips or tricks how to convey the message of certainty while you're still uncertain about the future? Thanks.
How to communicate uncertainty to people who like certainty, I guess, would be a way I'd rephrase that. Would anybody like to comment on that? Go ahead, Claire.
I'm not even sure I buy that the funding agency likes certainty. I think what they want to see, because I'm reading a lot of grant proposals with my lenses of the funding agency, is maybe they want to see how your present state of knowledge can then, be projected in the future. So they do not want to see something based on thin air. They want to see that, it's a bold step, but that, the base of the pyramid is solid. So I think that would be the spin I would recommend. But the funding agency, they want to see creativity. They want to see courage. We will take a bold step ahead, because on the other hand, they do not want, or they are reluctant to fund all this little incremental thing. They want to see a big, bold advent. So I think it's a question of dosing, balancing, maybe.
Yeah, from a funding agency perspective, I would completely agree with that. I mean, certainly in the area I work in, we're looking for potential, not necessarily certainty, because we're researchers and we know how research works. I have experienced what you've said in my time in government, because it is a different conversation and a different set of comparisons. I think I was talking about trying to make the case of funding research as opposed to building a new hospital. That is a very different sort of conversation. And it's hard. I mean, you have to get people to almost buy into the value of developing new knowledge, and you can't assume, it's very sad to say, but you can't assume everybody automatically does that. But the things I found have really helped is talking about, I suppose, what we've managed to do in the past. We can do more of this sort of thing again. I can't guarantee you precisely what we'll find, but it could be transformational. And using some of those historical stories to say it could be more like this, and it could be in this space, and these are the sorts of impacts on people's lives it might have, has certainly helped me.
Carl or Daniel, no? Any thoughts, Carl?
I think that maybe what they just want to, I think more in terms of the public, maybe not funders. So I appreciate all the insights from Brainy and Claire just now. In terms of talking about the public, I would go to what Daniel said about making things very simple and being clear about how complicated things are, right? I think stating that things are complex is absolutely an important understanding for everybody to have about research. There is no certainty. It is an attempt to broaden human knowledge. Success is the uncertainty, and learning is the certainty. Maybe that's the best way to phrase it.
Thank you. And one last question. We have just about enough time to squeeze it in. Question which is, I think in some way, very real in the European context, but also it speaks to us in Canada, which is how do you communicate in multiple languages? You know, are there any kind of challenge? Are there challenges inherent in that, or as the questioner Judith asks, is it better to just concentrate on English?
Well, that's a little touchy topic from a Canadian perspective, right? Canada is a bilingual country. I think it's important to feature both languages. But that said, there is, you know, tailoring to your audience and circumstances. I will not say anything further.
Carl, from sitting at Eurofusion with, what, 30, sorry, I forgot how many members you have, who many of them have different languages. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's very important to consider that. I understand the Canadian perspective too, but we communicate as an organization in English, and science communicates predominantly in English. However, the citizens of our member countries find it difficult to learn about something as complex as fusion energy research in a language that's not their native language. So I think translation and speaking these languages is absolutely key. So simple messages, but in their languages, I think is essential.
From a media perspective, is it helpful for somebody who speaks Czech when it comes time to talk science?
We need to develop it. We need to go forward, because in Czech Republic it's quite problematic. We speak Czech, and that's it. That's unfortunately the heritage of the evil era of Communist Party that was ruling this country for 40 years and damaging the country. And that's why also a lot of people do not speak English in this country, or are not fluent in English, and are not you know, happy to listen to something in English. We have a great dubbing. We have the greatest dubbing in the world. Truly. But unfortunately, even kids are watching dubbed films, not like in Scandinavia, for example, when they are watching in English. We are watching in Czech. So communicate something in English in the Czech Republic is really problematic, because a majority of the population is not comfortable in English. Even I can see in the ratings, when we have guests from abroad, the ratings are lower. Always, by a third, sometimes even by half, depending on what's happening. Just because it is not in Czech. That's just the reality, because it's not as comfortable for the Czech audience to listen to it. That's why we also prepare not only the dub version, but the English version online. That is quite popular by people, not only from the Czech Republic, but also from Canada. We have some fans from Canada, but also from Mexico and Japan and around the world. And that's why we need to help to communicate. And I do think that especially the research infrastructures need to be ready to communicate in Czech as well as in English, because you are aiming worldwide. You are not aiming for just the Czech audience. That would be just a small target.
Well, on that note, I want to thank the audience here in person with us and online for participating in this panel, which had the benefit of great insights from, in reverse order of their appearances, Karl Tischler, who's at Eurofusion, Daniel Stach, who's here with me from, I guess, representing the Czech Republic or Czech television, Claire Sanson, who's from the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and Bryony Butland from the United Kingdom Research and Innovation. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening in. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Carl. This was fun.